Hello there, and welcome to another unit review for Star Wars Legion. And in this video we're going to be looking at General Obi Wan Kenobi, as portrayed by Ewan McGregor in the prequel trilogy. And I think it's safe to say that this is a fan-favorite character and performance of the all-encompassing saga that is Star Wars. And while I don't think he's a bad unit by any stretch of the imagination, I think his representation in Legion might not live up to that high standard. But let's dive right into Obi Wan Kenobi with his very meaty and wordy unit card. Like many other heroes and Jedi in the game, this thing is just filled to the brim with text and symbols. And that's a good thing, because while Obi-Wan might not be the most competitive at the moment, those options and variables included in his card might come back into relevancy down the road when we get more Clone Wars units. But on the top left, we see that Obi Wan Kenobi is a whopping 175 points. Not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. After that, we have 2 slots for Force Powers, 1 slot for a Leadership upgrade, and then 1 slot for a Training upgrade. Pretty ideal slots for a Jedi in the Commander unit role. After that, we see that Obi-Wan has a red defense dice, 6 health, and 3 courage. Not wildly impressive, but definitely a durable unit. Below that, we see that Obi has absolutely no surges, defensive or offensive, which I gotta say is a little underwhelming for a 175 point character. After that, there's the 2 movement speed, which is pretty usual for a trooper character, and then the weapon profile of Obi-Wan's lightsaber, which is a melee double rainbow, so 2 red dice, 2 black dice, and 2 white dice, with Critical 2, Impact 2, and Pierce 2. Now, that's definitely going to do some serious damage in melee combat, but at the same time, we've seen a lot scarier lightsabers up to this point. Right away, you can kind of tell that you're not going to be using things like Sabre Throw on Obi-Wan. And based on those vanilla stats, Obi-Wan seems a little underwhelming for 175 points, but things get better when we look at the keywords that he has. Because truly, Obi-Wan is much more of a utility commander than he is an offensive commander. He has Jump 1 and Charge, which you expect from a Jedi. And that means Obi-Wan is going to be able to get around the battlefield pretty well, and if he does have to get into melee combat, it's not going to be much of an issue because he's going to be able to attack right after with that Charge. But things really start to get interesting when we get to the Guardian 3 keyword. That means Obi-Wan, with his red defense die, is going to be able to take 3 hits off of your clones nearby and put them onto his self. And that only gets better when we skip ahead and look at Sorasu Mastery. And what Sorasu Mastery does is allows Obi-Wan to spend a dodge token and gain Deflect along with his Guardian. And mind you, that Deflect, or rather Surge to Deflect, is going to also increase his overall survivability with that red defense die. And things once again only get better when we look at the fact that he has Immune to Pierce. Now, Pierce is a very strong keyword against Jedi, seeing it as it punches through their defensive roles. Such is not the case with Obi-Wan, though, who does not need to take that into consideration when using Guardian or defending. And to top off his keywords, Obi-Wan also has Master of the Force 1. Yet again, another keyword that's going to synergize with his Guardian ability, which we'll cover in the next category of Force Powers. So, because Obi-Wan has 2 Force Power categories, I'm going to kind of cut to the chase and say that you want one of those to be Force Reflexes. That card is going to give Obi-Wan a dodge every time you activate him, and allow his Sorasu Mastery to deflect shots back at the enemies while simultaneously increase his defensive dice. Just keep in mind this is exhaustible, and you will likely use your Master of the Force to ready this card and get another dodge token next time you activate. Now, that being said, it is a 10-point card, and Obi-Wan does have 2 command cards that give you dodge tokens. And even without those, if you're playing Obi-Wan defensively, you might not need him to be moving too much, and you might just be able to take 1 to 2 dodge actions with your standard activation. But for most builds, I think this is going to be an auto-include. But what about that second Force slot? What would you take in tandem after you took Force Reflexes? At the top of the list, we have Battle Meditation, which is sort of a Force-powered comms relay. It allows you to take an order issued to this card, and then issue it to one friendly unit at range 1. And while I'm not usually too keen on the comms relay, I think this battle meditation might synergize pretty well with Obi Wan, considering that he has 2 cards that activate himself. And as we know with clones, you want those face-up tokens for the fire support ability. But where this card really shines is with the General Kenobi card, Obi-Wan's 3-pip. This card activates Obi-Wan and 2 other units, and it allows those units that Obi-Wan issues an order to gain 1 surge token for every friendly unit within range 1 of it. Now this is a very powerful card that can get a lot of surge tokens on a lot of clones, and giving it to 1 more clone unit is going to give you a potential 50% more surge tokens. Tokens that again can be shared around the battlefield with other clones. It's also going to make upgrades like aggressive tactics a little more appealing, but we'll look more at that when we get to build strategies. But for 5 points, Battle Meditation, absolutely a solid runner-up. After that is Sabre Throw, and like I said earlier, unfortunately I think Sabre Throw is going to be the one card that you can more or less just skip on Obi-Wan. That'll give you a range to attack with 2 red and 1 black dice. It's not terrible, but at the same time, Obi-Wan, funnily enough, kind of already does have a ranged attack by deflecting his blaster bolts back at his enemy with Sorasu Mastery. At 5 points, it's definitely not a terrible upgrade, but I think this is a pretty hotly contested spot, and I think that action you would spend throwing your lightsaber is better spent getting dodge tokens. And after that, we have Jedi Mind Trick. And I think Jedi Mind Trick might be just below Sabre Throw for probably the last upgrade you want to give Obi Wan Kenobi. Which is funny because it kind of becomes his signature move later on in his life. But for 5 points here, you're getting an exhaustible ability that puts 2 suppression tokens on an enemy unit. It's not bad, but a skilled commander is going to be able to deal with 2 suppression tokens pretty easily, especially when they get in the range 1 to 2 of you. Now again, in the future, if we see more suppression synergy, this might come into play. And you might be able to do some cheeky stuff with the mortars with the phase 2s. But as it stands, I don't see this being more than a one-trick pony, especially considering that's exhaustible. After Mind Trick, we have Force Guidance. This is a 10-point exhaustible card. For a free action, it can give up to 2 friendly units at range 1 to 2 a free surge token. Definitely a solid choice. The only problem here is if you are taking it with your Force Reflexes, it's going to be competing with Force Reflexes to get refreshed with your Master of the Force ability. And while I do quite like this ability, I think Obi-Wan just has multiple avenues for providing surge tokens, and I think this just isn't the most bang for its buck when it comes to that. That being said, it's definitely something to consider when we look at strategies later. And next on the list we have Hope, the sort of discount force power. It's only 3 points. It is a light side only card, and you gain Inspire 1. After your rally step, you may remove 1 suppression token from a friendly unit at range 1 to 2. Now, I actually quite like Hope. It's a cheap card, and it helps you deal with suppression, something that clones have a bit of trouble with at the moment. Having that ability to plink away at the suppression tokens that are being put on your units nearby is going to keep them in the game longer, and if Obi-Wan does die, it'll likely keep them away from that tipping point where they're going to start running off the field. Simply removing 1 suppression token might not seem that impressive, but when you're doing it every activation, it really does add up. And trust me, your opponent, when they're playing suppression lists, they're going to feel like they're fighting an uphill battle when every time Obi-Wan activates, one of their hard-earned suppression tokens vaporizes right in front of them. I think it's a strong contender for runner-up force power, regardless of what you put on your first slot, especially if you want to keep Obi-Wan relatively cheap. And finally, back at the top of the list, we have Force Push. Now, Force Push is a little expensive at 10 points, but I think it is a very useful card. Most other Jedi are going to use it to pull the enemy towards them to help get into that melee combat. But for Obi-Wan, I think he's going to use it to yoink enemies from cover and have your clones fire support with each other to vaporize them in the open. Heavy cover is very good, and the ability to take that away from your enemy can turn their strategy on its head. That being said, it is exhaustible, and it is 10 points. Certainly worth considering. Now, if you've been paying attention here, I think you're starting to see a trend. There's a lot of good force powers that Obi-Wan can take, and he can make use of all of them The problem is which one is going to synergize best with your playstyle, and at the end of the day, is it worth the extra points on this already very expensive model? But we'll discuss more of that when we move on to the strategy phase of this unit review. In the meantime, let's take a look at Obi-Wan's command cards. At the top, we have Commanding Presence, which is just, I don't think is a great command card. Going from 3 to 4 is nice, but for 10 points, I think it's just better to keep your army in cohesion. And I don't think there's that much of a necessity to spread your forces out like that. Maybe there's some crazy low-key strategy with getting Obi-Wan to push orders onto bark speeders, but I just don't see people putting Commanding Presence in this slot for 5 points. After that, we have Esteemed Leader, which is definitely the worst card to put in Obi-Wan's command slot, because it actually hurts Obi-Wan. Giving units nearby Guardian 1 means you won't be able to use your Guardian with them, so absolutely no way. Never take Esteemed Leader, unless you're playing a practical joke on yourself. After that, we have Improvised Orders, which I think can be wholly skipped on the clone army as it stands. I talked about how it's nice to have bark speeders and R2-D2 outside of your activation pool, and the problems that comes with pulling those units when you don't need them, and Improvised Orders definitely helps prevent that, but I think there's just other ways to get around that, and spending 10 points on the commander slot on an exhaustible card is just not worth it, especially when you consider that most clone armies are going to be running a lot of troop choices anyways at the moment. Really, it isn't the worst upgrade, and if you feel like you have terrible luck pulling those tokens and like to know what's around the corner, you could take it, but I think it could be skipped for the most part. Again, Obi-Wan's expensive. Why bump up another 10 points on something that's not a bona fide, thorough boost? Next, we have Strict Orders, and I think again, for the most part, this one can be skipped. The main problem here is that it only affects units with face-up tokens, and Obi-Wan only has 2 of his 3 cards that activate other units, and unless you use that Battle Meditation combo we spoke of earlier, it's only going to be 2 units each time. And I'll be honest, I'd rather just roll the dice. Now, maybe if you know you're going to be facing a hardcore suppression list, and you can layer this on with hope, but for the most part, I think you can overall just skip over Strict Orders. I think for most commanders, it's a pretty lackluster command card, and there's usually always better ways to deal with suppression. Now, lastly, we have Aggressive Tactics, which, when you first look at, is a great card, but once more, you need face-up order tokens, and Obi-Wan just doesn't give that many of those. There's also far better ways to get surge tokens through command cards with Rex, Obi-Wan, or just running Phase 2 clones. That being said, there is a strategy that we're going to look at later where this card might come into play, and I think running Assault and Push alongside with Obi's cards are going to help you out if you do want to use Aggressive Tactics. It's not a bad option, but overall, I really do think that Obi-Wan's command slot can be skipped. There's just nothing there that really strikes me as very impressive or worth the points. But if you disagree with that, leave a comment below and explain your reasoning. Maybe there's something that I did miss. But next we'll jump on to the training slots, and this is going to be a bit like the command, where there's not really anything that kind of jumps out as boosting or synergizing with Obi-Wan that well. Just a few minor perks here and there that you could pay for if you wish. So first we're going to have Duck and Cover. And I think you can more or less skip this one on Obi-Wan. The cover is nice, but if you're using Obi-Wan properly, you're going to have those dodge tokens, and you'd much rather be trying to deflect those shots back at the enemies. Also, keep in mind when you're using Guardian, you are not technically the defender, so you cannot use cover to negate shots. Otherwise, I absolutely would consider taking this card. After that, we have Hunter, and this is actually a pretty good card for a melee unit, because usually by the time you get to melee, your enemy is going to be hurt, and you will be able to use those aim tokens you get from Hunter to swing and hit them harder in melee combat. But Obi-Wan, again, is more of a utility commander than he is a combat commander, and because of that, and because of the relatively high point cost on Hunter, I think it's best skipped. Though definitely not the worst option if you're hell-bent on putting something in this training slot. And next we have Tenacity. And when you're wounded, this allows you to get an extra red dice in your attack pool. And this is an obvious go-to for a melee unit. And Obi-Wan will likely have a wound by the time he gets to melee combat if you're using Guardian enough. But Obi-Wan's attack pool is kind of flimsy, and I think getting an aim token from either Hunter or Offensive Push on the turn you charge is going to help you out a little bit more. That considered, if you stay in melee for a prolonged period of time, you're going to be probably taking an aim token before you attack. So Hunter and Offensive Push might be redundant in that scenario. It's kind of a tough call, but I think the fact that Tenacity is cheaper than Hunter and it's not exhaustible like Offensive Push, this might be the upgrade that you want to take on Obi-Wan. Especially if you think the bulk of your enemy force is going to end up right in your face. Next we have Endurance, which allows you to remove one suppression token at the end of your activation. It's not bad, but at Courage 3, I don't think it's something you really need to worry about. And at 6 points, for the most part, I think you're going to be skipping it. After that we have Overwatch, just something you're not going to be using with a melee character. Especially with Obi-Wan's deflection abilities with Guardian. It's just a no-go on the points for that one. And then lastly we have Offensive Push, one of my favorite cards in the game. Now, this is going to give you Tactical 1, where after you perform a standard move, you gain 1 aim token. And as I mentioned earlier, this might be good for when the enemy does close in on your Obi-Wan, and you just want to run in there, and you got to get that charge off. You have to do 2 moves, and then you can tap this, get the aim token, and then your relatively flimsy attack pool with those 2 black dice and 2 white dice, you're going to get some more hits in there. But it is exhaustible, making it a sort of one-trick pony for that round when you make first contact with your enemy, and overall, I don't know if it's as good as Tenacity. So, much like Obi-Wan's command slot, I have no problem skipping training overall. There's a few items that pop up in there that might be useful, like Hunter or Tenacity or maybe Offensive Push, but for the most part, they're minor perks. And I don't want to get too much into strategy just yet, but I think you can see a running theme where I'm trying to keep Obi-Wan from getting too top-heavy. But what do you think? What do you run on your Obi-Wan? What do you think a Jedi must take into combat with his cards? And am I undervaluing any of those upgrades? Leave a comment below if so. But let's go ahead and get onto the juicy command cards that come with Obi Wan Kenobi, because they are quite interesting. For our 1-pip we have Hello There. And this might be my favorite 1-pip in the game, because it packs quite a punch for a 1-pip, and it's also the perfect shit hits the fan card. It is made for when the enemy is up on you and you are surrounded. This gives Obi-Wan the Nimble keyword, which allows him to get a dodge token back after he spends it. And as we know, dodge triggers the reflection with the Sabre Mastery. Very good to have Nimble added onto him there. And at the start of the activation phase, Obi Wan Kenobi gains 1 aim, 1 dodge, 1 standby, or 1 surge token for each enemy unit at range 1 to 2. Now, you basically just get to choose a token of your choice. You're definitely going to be taking at least 1 dodge, and then likely some surge tokens, and maybe an aim or 2. And do note that that is triggered at the start of the activation phase, not at the start of Obi-Wan's activation. So if you find yourself in a situation where your enemies are going to start shooting, and you really need Obi-Wan to start using that Guardian, but you don't have him activated to get that dodge token yet, you can use this card. And that's going to help Obi-Wan do what he does best. It's also going to pile him up with tokens if you play it when he's in the right position. It's a great 1-pip that's going to give you the initiative when you really need it the most. Combine it with Battle Meditation, and you can even pass that face-up order token onto a nearby clone unit, which will allow you to get fire support still. A very good card, and I think a must-run if you're using Obi-Wan in your force, especially for the time being when we have so few commanders. Next we have Knowledge in Defense, which is Obi-Wan's 2-pip, and this is when Obi-Wan starts to become more of a commander and synergizing with the rest of the clone faction. This activates 2 trooper units, and gives Obi-Wan himself a dodge token for every friendly trooper unit at range 1. It also allows Obi Wan Kenobi to use Guardian even if he's in a melee attack, which is slightly less relevant, but having 2 troopers activated and face up, again with clones, is always great. And here again we have another method in which you can give Obi Wan Kenobi dodge tokens without having to activate him. Meaning you'll be able to make use of that Sabre Throw Mastery right off the bat from the beginning of the turn before your enemy can open fire. And really, I think that's key with Obi Wan. Not the most exciting card, but very utilitarian. And after that we have General Kenobi, the 3-pip card that activates Obi-Wan and 2 other units. Just units. It doesn't have to be troopers or anything of the sort. So pretty flexible there. And this card reads, when Obi-Wan Kenobi issues an order to a unit, that unit gains 1 surge token for each other friendly unit at range 1 of it. Now you can see how this will snowball immensely, especially if you have a massed force. It's a very potent ability and can very quickly lather your army in surge tokens, which can, again, in turn be daisy-chained across the map by your clone's token sharing ability. And calling back for the final time to Battle Meditation, I think this card synergizes best with it, where you're gonna have another unit activating, another unit generating tokens based on units around it. It's just gonna snowball and get you so many tokens in one round, which, like I always say in my clone videos, are great, especially when used defensively. So what you see with Obi-Wan is 3 cards that are very beneficial. They're very good cards, and even the ones that only benefit himself, like his 1-pip, are still by proxy benefiting the rest of your army by giving him those dodge tokens that he can use to use Sabre Mastery with. In the R2-D2 unit review, I talked about how R2's underwhelming cards are kind of what you'd expect from a 35-point unit, as the cards kind of come with the cost of the unit, in my opinion. And I think you see that reflected here again, where Obi-Wan is a 175-point, pretty expensive unit, and while his base stat line isn't great, I think his command cards are absolutely phenomenal, and I love all 3 of them. Which brings us to the next category, and that is strategy with Obi Wan Kenobi. You want to keep Obi Wan Kenobi relatively cheap. As I mentioned earlier, he is a utility commander, and he's basically going to be acting like a sort of deflector shield for your expensive clone army, making use of that Guardian 3 and Sabre Mastery to sponge damage off your clones and potentially bounce it right back onto your opponent. But that strategy does rely on the luck of the dice, and if the dice gods aren't favoring you that day, you could end up with a dead Obi Wan Kenobi very, very quick. That being said, I think even when the dice are on your side, if you play Obi Wan Kenobi right, you're probably going to end up losing him by the end of most matches. I really do view him as this sort of martyr hero, where he kind of just soaks damage in on him, and even if he doesn't put it out back on the enemy, he defers it from the rest of your army so they can stay alive and do the objective. And when things do heat up, he'll be the one to rush into combat, meet the enemy head first, and do as much damage as possible, while your clones can mop up the rest. But with that philosophy, you do kind of see the problem with Obi Wan Kenobi. Is Guardian 3 and Sabre Mastery and 6 wounds really going to absorb as much as just 4 clone squads would take? And would that Sabre Mastery deflect as much damage as they put out? I think it's a bit of a gimmick that relies on a lot of luck, and if it doesn't play out, you're in the hole very quickly. That being said, I think the core strategy for Obi-Wan when you do run him is always going to be keeping him within range 1 of a bulk of your clone force, making use of that deflection with Sabre Mastery, and making sure he has dodge tokens on him to do so. Keeping him in the foreground of that bulk of your army is also going to help deter enemy units from getting too close to them. And should a character like Grievous show up, Obi will be the first to meet him and keep him from slicing and dicing your clones. And that may be a somewhat pessimistic outlook on Obi-Wan, but his command cards are very appealing. And I think if you run him alongside a commander like Rex, it can synergize quite well with the clone army despite Obi-Wan not actually being a clone trooper. And that's sort of going to lead us into how to equip Obi-Wan Kenobi. And the first build we're going to look at is how I would run Obi-Wan if I were running him alongside Rex. So first of all, you're going to want that Force Reflexes like I mentioned earlier. Obi-Wan's cards can generate a lot of dodge tokens for him, but if you're running Rex, there's going to be a lot of times where you need to use Rex's cards instead. And I think this is going to stand true for more commanders as they're rolled out in the future. So if you're running Obi-Wan alongside another commander or another operative where you know you're going to be using their command cards a lot also, definitely give Obi-Wan the reflexes so he can get that dodge and use the Sabre Mastery. And truth be told, After that, you can stop. You can just give Obi-Wan that, keep him at 185 points, and you will have a solid beat stick commander to help keep the rest of your forces alive. Now, if you were to add options to that, if you have the extra points, you could consider Force Push to help get enemies out of tough situations if you know they're going to be burrowing in. Or as a cheap alternative, you could run Hope if you know you're going to have issues with suppression, say if you're going up against an Imperial list. Tenacity is also a decent option, although again, it can be skipped. So again, if you're running Obi Wan Kenobi alongside another commander, focus on getting those dodge tokens with Force Guidance, focus on using Sorcery Mastery to deflect. Don't focus on making Obi-Wan too much of a commander and front-loading it with points. Instead, use him to keep your units alive, and use his cards when opportune. Now, if you're running Obi-Wan as a solo commander, my advice doesn't vary too much from that. All I'm going to say is just consider taking Battle Meditation in addition to your Force Reflexes. This again is going to help keep Obi alive, but it's also going to pump up his command abilities a bit. And I will make special note here that if Obi-Wan is your only commander, do not use that Guardian unless you have the dodge token to use the deflect also. Again, that's going to turn that surge into a block and effectively make your save go from 4+ to 3+. Trust me, I have lost Obi-Wan to fistful of surge dice and not had the dodge token to spend. It does not feel good. Do not repeat my mistakes. But I do have a third optional build for Obi-Wan that I'm going to throw out there, and while it might not be the most competitive, I think it is an interesting one because it synergizes a couple abilities pretty well together, and we'll call this one the Surge Token Generator. To start, we're going to give him Force Guidance instead of Force Reflexes, and Force Guidance is going to be the exhaustible for 10 points that's going to give up to 2 friendly units at range 1 to 2 a Surge Token. And being exhaustible, that's going to be the card that we're going to continuously untap with our Master of the Force ability. And for our runner-up ability, we're going to give him Battle Meditation, again to increase that command and control, especially with that General Kenobi card. That's also going to help us get more Clone Trooper units with face-up tokens, which we're going to want because we are going to add aggressive tactics to this build also. That will put Obi-Wan at an even 200 points, and if you want, you can throw on Tenacity in there too, if you have the extra points, but it's not a necessity. But what you have here is an Obi Wan Kenobi that's going to be generating 1 to 2 tokens with his Force Guidance every time he activates, and then every time he gives people face-up order tokens, he's going to be giving up to 4 surges. That's going to be a lot of tokens each turn. And again, that Battle Meditation is increasing our face-up clone tokens. So on the least fitting card for that scenario, which is going to be Hello There, you're still dishing out 3 Surge tokens. So if you don't plan on running Rex or any Phase 2s, this is definitely a good way to get those Surge tokens out there, and I would definitely recommend you taking the Push and Assault command card to sort of increase those face-up order tokens to get more of those Surges out there throughout the match. Though overall, I seriously do recommend running Obi-Wan as cheap as possible, prioritizing that dodge token with Force Reflexes, and maybe considering the Battle Meditation if you really want that extra command and control. Just always keep in mind that his main gimmick is to soak firepower off of other units, and while he does have good defense, it's not perfect and he's going to be taking wounds. And as I said earlier, even in matches that you win and you use Obi-Wan to the best of his capabilities and completely capitalize on him, I think you're still going to see him not make it to the end of most games. So what do I think of Obi-Wan overall? Well, I think he's a very fun Jedi commander. I think he's pretty unique, and there might be some untapped synergies with him in the future. But at the moment, I just don't see him being used very competitively. Again, 175 points is just a little too expensive for a beat stick that only has 6 wounds. Fortunately, most of you are going to have Obi Wan Kenobi anyways, seeing as he comes in the Clone Wars core starter set. And I think it's a fantastic model. He has a great pose, and I'm so glad they gave him that Clone Wars armor, because he looks so good alongside his clone troopers. So while I may be getting a little down on Obi-Wan, I definitely recommend every clone player uses this time while we don't have a lot of other units to try Obi-Wan out, use him on a solo list, use him in a skirmish list, use him alongside Rex, give him a spin. He definitely isn't terrible, and it's pretty funny to see that Hello There and General Kenobi pile tokens up on your units. And maybe someday some more synergy will arise with him and new units. But until then, let me know what you guys think about Obi Wan Kenobi in the comments section below. Am I undervaluing him? I think if he were at 150 points, he would be a fantastic commander, but I think he just pushes that threshold. Would you plan on using him more offensively than defensively? Let me know what you guys think. And if you want to see more content like this, go ahead and hit subscribe, turn the notifications on, and until next time, take care.